Good morning and welcome back at another session of literature class. Dear students, in the last class, we already saw once the doctor Scout moved out of the shed where Cloudslayer was, he thought of carrying the machine to the garden with some kind of special idea in his mind. So far, we do not know exactly what he is planning to do. He had an idea in his mind, so therefore, with full of difficulty, he carried the box all alone outside the garden and he is planning to experiment something there. Let's see what the man is going to do. He stood there in the garden beside the wooden table, so pale, small, and thin that he looked like an Elysian, consumptive, bespectacled child. The sun had gone down. There was no wind, no sound at all. From where he stood, he could see over a low fence into the next garden, and there was a woman walking down in the garden with a flower basket on her arm. He watched her for a while without thinking about her at all. Then he turned to the box on the table and pressed a switch on its front. He put his left hand on the volume control and his right hand on the knob that moved a needle across a large central dial, like the wavelength dial of a radio. The dial was marked with many numbers in a series of bands starting at 15,000 and going on up to 10 lakh. He stood there in the garden beside the wooden table, so pale, small, and thin that he looked like an Elysian, consumptive, bespectacled child. The writer here says that he stood over there in the garden beside the wooden table. He has placed the wooden table, that is what the sound machine is. He sat beside the machine and he was fully tense. That is what the writer brings out here with the words, so pale, palish in color, because of full of tension that the man was undergoing. He was very anxious. He does not know whether, he is not very sure, confident that the machine is going to produce the sound which is inaudible to the human ears. And he is worried if it produces. At the same time, he is also worried if it does not work. Both the ways the man is really tense. So therefore, he was palish in color over here, small and thin, that he looked like an Elysian, consumptive, bespectacled child. Bespectacled child over here means as like that of a very studious child. A person who is suffering from a lungs disease, that is what consumptive he was. All these words the writer has used to bring about the condition of the man. He is totally tensed, very anxious about. The sun had gone down. It was already in the evening time. The sun had gone down and there was no wind, no sound at all. The atmosphere was very conducive. There was no sound at all. There was no wind even. So the atmosphere was perfectly silent. From where he stood, he could see over a low fence into the next garden, and there was a woman walking down the garden with a flower basket on his arm. He started looking in and around. The only thing what the man could observe was there was a fencing to separate his garden as well as the garden of another person. So, and the fencing between both the gardens was so low, and he looked through the low fencing, and the other side he could find out a lady carrying a flower basket at her arms. That was the only thing visible to him. Otherwise, everything was very conducive for him to listen to the sound from the machine that he carries in his arm and kept over there. He could see over a low fence into the next garden, and there was a woman walking down the garden with a flower basket on her arm. She carried a flower basket on her arm. That was the only thing which was visible to Cloudslayer at the present moment. He watched her for a while without thinking of her at all. He started observing what the lady is doing. But at the same time, what the writer uses over here is that without thinking about her at all. He was not thinking about the lady at all. He was concentrating maybe the action of the lady. That is why the writer says that he started, once again let's see that, he watched her for a while without thinking about her at all. He did not think about the lady at all. He was observing what the lady is planning to do. Then he turned into the box on the table and pressed a switch on its front, and he felt that it is the appropriate time for him. So therefore, then he turned into the box. He was sitting beside the machine. Now he moved it towards the box on the table and pressed a switch on its front, and he started pressing a switch which was placed in front of the sound machine he produced. He put his left hand on the volume control and his right hand on the knob that moved a needle across the large central dial like the wavelength dial of a radio. Let's see what else he is doing. He put his left hand on the volume control. He placed his left hand on the volume control at the machine and his right hand on the knob that moved a needle. So there was a needle at the knob, a needle across the large central dial. There were altogether 3 dials. And there was he started observing, or let us see that he moved the needle across the large central dial like the wavelength dial of a radio, which resembled like the wavelength dial of a radio. In the FM radios and so on, we see, or in the normal radios, we see that there is a small needle which used to move according to the wavelength. Such kind of needle was placed over there on the sound machine as well. The dial was marked with many numbers in a series of bands starting at 15,000 and going on up to 10 lakh. Yes, and it was the dial was marked with many numbers in a series of bands. So the sound variations ranging from 15,000 and going on up to 10 lakhs. So from 15,000 to 10 lakh was what was marked over there on the dial. We have to be very, very careful here. The sound which is above 15,000, which is inaudible to the human ears. That is the reason it has got a dial which has got the number ranging from 15,000, starting the vibration, which cannot be from where human ears cannot listen to the sound at all. So 15,000 to 10,000 vibration per second. That is what was inscribed in this dial. And now he was bending forward over the machine. His head was cocked to one side in a tense listening attitude. His right hand was beginning to turn the knob. The needle was traveling slowly across the dial, so slowly he could hardly see it move, and in the earphones he could hear a faint spasmodic crackling. And now he was bending forward over the machine. He just bent forward over the machine, and his head was cocked to. Cocked to means he raised his head in a vertical position. He stood very straight forward to one side in a tense listening attitude, full of concentration to listen to whether he is able to listen anything from the sound machine. And his right hand was beginning to turn the knob. He was about to turn the knob of the machine. The needle was traveling slowly across the dial. So that is the time he started observing. The needle started just moving slightly, so slowly he could hardly see it move. The movement was so slow, hardly he was able to see the movement, but at the same time it was making a kind of a slow movement there. And in the earphones he could hear a faint spasmodic crackling. Spasmodic over here means the sound which is produced at interval. Such kind of sound he was able to listen to, which was coming from the machine. Two things that he observed there. One of the things is he started listening to a kind of small sound at intervals. That is why the writer says it was something like that of a spasmodic crackling. Crackling means the sound here, the noise here. Through his earphones he was able to hear that, as well as he observed the machine. He finds the dial moving very, very slightly. Behind this crackling sound, he could hear a distant humming tone, which was the noise of the machine itself, but that was all. As he listened, he became conscious of a curious sensation, a feeling that his ears were stretching out away from his head, that each ear was connected to his head by a thin, stiff wire like a tentacle, and that The wires were lightning, that the ears were going up and up towards a secret and forbidden territory, a dangerous ultrasonic region where ears had never been before and had no right to be. He observes certain changes over there. Let's see what happens here. Behind this crackling sound, through his earphone, he was able to hear a kind of spasmodic crackling sound, small sound. He could hear a distant humming tone, which was the noise of the machine itself, but that was all. Other than that, he was able to hear a kind of a humming sound. The other sound, that is a spasmodic crackling, he was able to listen to through his earphone, with the help of his earphone. But other than that, he was able to hear a kind of a humming tone as well. Once again, behind this crackling sound, he could hear a distant humming tone, which was the noise of the machine itself, but that was all. There was no other sound at all. The area was quite serene. There was no noise at all. As he listened to, he became conscious of a curious sensation, a feeling that his ears were stretching out away from his head, that each ear was connected to his head by a thin, stiff wire like a tentacle, and that the wires were lengthening, that the ears were going up and up towards a secret and forbidden territory, a dangerous ultrasonic region where ears had never been before and had no right to be. Another kind of sensational feeling that takes place within him as he listened, as he started listening to the humming tone which was coming out from the machine. He became conscious of a strange sensation. The narrator says that a kind of strange sensational feeling that has taken place in the life of Clown Slum, a kind of sensation, a feeling that he felt that, please remember, it's a feeling for Clown Slum, a feeling that his ears were stretching out. He felt that his ears are slowly stretching out in his body, from his body, away from his head. He felt that ears are stretching out away from his body, from his head, that each ear was connected to his head by a thin, stiff wire. Now he feels that ears are not attached at all to his head. At the same time, he feels that ears are stretching out from the head, and it is connected to the head with a kind of thin as well as a stiff wire. That is what he is feeling at the present moment is, as he started observing the sound, listening very carefully the sound which was produced by the machine. He now feels that his ears are totally separated from his head. He feels that ears are slowly stretching out. Both the ears move out from his body, and he feels that ears are connected to the body, to the head, only with a kind of wire. That is what the writer speaks here. Thin, stiff wire like a tentacle. Tentacle means like a thin part of the body. As like a thin part of the body, the wires, the ears are connected to the body, to the head, with a kind of a thin wire like that of a tentacle, and that the wires were lengthening, that the ears were going up and up, and he feels that the wire is becoming larger and larger. It turns to be becoming longer and longer. That is what the writer says, lengthening. The wires were lengthening, that the ears were going up and up towards the secret and forbidden territory. Forbidden territory means a place where ears have no right to be. A forbidden place. He feels that the wires which is attached, that is what, let me stress again, that is what his feeling is. Ears are connected with a stiff thin wire, and he felt that the wires are becoming longer and longer. They are becoming longer and longer. It turned to be lengthening, that the ears were going up and up towards a secret forbidden territory, and the ears started moving up and up, going to a place, a forbidden territory, a place where ears cannot reach at all. A dangerous ultrasonic region. Ultrasonic means a kind of sound which human ears cannot grasp, cannot hear at all. A dangerous ultrasonic region where ears had never been before and had no right to be. It is such a kind of place. Ears are moving to such a kind of place where they have no right to be. The little needle crept slowly across the dial, and suddenly he heard a shriek. a frightful piercing shriek, and he jumped and dropped his hands, catching hold of the edge of the table. He stared around him as if expecting to see the person who had shrieked. There was no one inside except the woman in the garden next door, and it was certainly not she. She was bending down, cutting yellow roses and putting them in her basket. The little needle crept slowly. The little needle started moving slowly across the dial. Immediately a change that has taken place in the machine. The little needle crept. Crept over here means it started moving. It moved slowly across the dial, and suddenly he heard a shriek. And exactly at the same moment, as he could see the movement of the needle inside the dial, exactly at the same moment he could hear a shriek. That is what shriek means, a kind of loud scream. He could hear somebody screaming. The moment the needle started moving, exactly at the same moment he could hear a shriek. He heard a shriek, a frightful piercing shriek. It was such a kind of frightful shriek, piercing shriek, and he jumped and dropped his hand. He jumped and he dropped his hands, catching hold of the edge of the table. He felt that he is about to collapse. He felt that he may fall down on the ground at the present moment. So therefore he started catching hold of the edge of the table. He stared around him as if expecting to see the person who had shrieked, and he started looking around. He felt that there is someone who is standing beside him, someone who is standing close by him, and that person must have shrieked. That is what his feeling the present moment was. So therefore he started looking around to find out who was the man that produced such a kind of loud scream. Once again, let's see. He stared around him as if expecting to see the person who had shrieked. There was no one inside except the woman in the next door garden, and it was certainly not she. As he observed everywhere in and around, he could find none other than the lady who was standing in the other garden. There was nobody in and around him. So let's see once again. There was no one inside except the woman in the garden next door, and it was certainly not she. And the shriek was not produced by that lady at all, because she was bending down, cutting yellow roses and putting them in her basket. She was busy in her business. She came over there carrying a flower basket, and what she was busy with, she was bending down, cutting yellow roses and putting them in her basket. She was busy in cutting down the flowers with the help of the flower cutter, and she started placing them in the basket that she carried on her arm. So therefore the man understood that the shriek was not produced by the lady in the other garden, but he was very sure that there was someone who shrieked. Again it came, a throatless, inhuman shriek, sharp and short, very clear and cold. The note itself possessed a minor metallic quality that he had never heard before. Counselor looked around him, searching instinctively for the source of the noise. The woman next door was the only living thing on sight. He saw her reach down, take a rose stem in fingers of one hand and snip the stem with a pair of scissors. Again he heard the scream. Again it came. So once again the same sound came, a throatless, inhuman shriek. The sound was, though it was a loud scream, he is very clear that it is not produced by human being at all. Once again, it was a throatless sound. The sound has not come from the throat of a human person. Inhuman shriek. It was an inhuman. The sound was not produced by any human being at all, but it was sharp and short. The sound was very sharp as well as it was short, very clear and cold. The note itself possessed a minor metallic quality. So the writer says that it was like a minor as well as metallic quality. Maybe the sound that is produced by the metal, like that of the metallic quality that he had never heard before. But such kind of sound produced by the metals even he has never heard in his life. It is for the first time he experiences a different sound in his life. Counselor looked around him, searching Instinctively, for the source of the noise, as an instinct, he started searching for the noise. There was nobody that instructed who instructed him to find out from where the sound has come from. Instinctively, he goes in order to find out where the sound has come from. The woman next door was the only living thing inside. He started searching everywhere. The only person inside was the woman in the other garden who was going on, or who was busy with cutting the yellow color rose flowers. He saw her reach down, take a rose stem in the fingers of one hand and snip the stem with the pair of scissors. He observed the lady once again. The lady took a piece of flower which she has already cut, and she started once again cutting it with one hand and snip the stem. Snip over here means cut with the scissors, maybe the flower cutters. The flower cutter that she was using, she snipped the stem with a pair of scissors. Again he heard the scream. The moment the lady started cutting the stem of the rose flower, once again he was able to hear the scream. Once again, let's see. Again he heard the scream. Again exactly the moment the lady took the flower in her hand and she cut the stem of the flower, and the same screaming sound he was able to hear once again. It came at the exact moment when the rose stem was cut, and the shriek that came at the exact moment the lady cut the flower with her scissors. It came at the exact moment when the rose stem was cut. At this point, the woman straightened up and put the scissors in the basket with the roses and turned to walk away. So at this point, the woman straightened up. She was bending down to cut the flowers. So now she straightened herself. The woman straightened up, put the scissors in the basket. Maybe she must have completed the day's job. So let's see what she does. Put the scissors in the basket. She straightened herself, and after that she placed the scissors in the flower basket with the roses, together with the roses, and turned to walk away. And the lady thought of just moving away. She started moving away from there after completing her work. Mrs. Launders, counselor, shouted. His voice thrilled with excitement. Oh, Mrs. Saunders. So that is what her name is. Once again, let's see that. The moment she started walking away, after having completed her job, she cut the flowers, she placed the scissors in the same basket together with the flower bunches that she had already cut, and she started just moving away. And therefore now, Mrs. Saunders, counselor started calling out her name. She is his neighbor, so therefore he knows her very well by name. Mrs. Launders, counselor shouted, his voice shrill. He called it in a high-pitched tone with a shrill voice with excitement. At the same time, he was highly excited. Oh, Mrs. Launders. Once again, he called out the name of his neighbor, Miss Launders. And looking around, the woman saw her neighbor standing on his lawn, a fantastic arm-waving little person with a pair of earphones on his head, calling to her in a voice so high and loud that she became alarmed. And looked around, the woman saw her neighbor standing on his lawn. The lady observed from where the sound has come from, and she found that the woman saw her neighbor standing on his lawn. So the woman saw her neighbor standing in his lawn, a fantastic arm-waving little person. He started waving his arm towards Mrs. Launders the moment he called out her name. Arm-waving little person with a pair of earphones on his head. We already know he was having placed earphones on his ears, calling to her in a voice so high and loud. And she became alarmed. She turned to be very, very cautious. She was alarmed because she is not very far from the man, and the man is calling out her name so loudly with a shrill voice that was not required for him at all. It was just needed for him to call out her name, Mrs. Launders, very slowly, but with the top of his voice. He started calling out her name, and therefore the lady was a bit frightened. And let's see the reason once again. Calling to her in a voice so high and loud that she became alarmed. She turned to be very, very cautious. She was very alarmed. And let's see, cut another one. Please cut another one quickly. And the man says, cut another one. Cut one more flower. Cut one more flower. That is what he instructed her. She stood still, staring at him. Why, Mr. Counselor? She said, what's the matter? Why should I cut another flower? What's the matter behind it? Why are you asking me to cut another flower? The lady has already completed her work. That is what we saw in the previous paragraph. She completed her task, placed the scissors in together with the flowers, and she started walking away. That was the moment Counselor, in the top of his voice, started to call out her name, and now he says, cut one more flower, please cut one more flowers. The lady asked, what's the matter? Why should I cut another flower? My work is already over. Whatever the number of flowers I need, I have already cut. Why, Mr. Counselor? She said, what's the matter? Please do as I ask. He said, cut just one more rose. He started requesting now, please do as I ask. Please tell it, do it for me as I asked you to do. He said, cut just one more rose. Cut one more rose, please. Mrs. Lowndes had always believed her neighbor to be a rather peculiar person. Now it seemed that he had gone completely crazy. She wondered whether she should run into the house and fetch her husband. No, she thought. No, he is harmless. I will just humor him. Certainly, Mr. Counselor, if you like, she said. She took her scissors from the basket, bent down and snipped another rose. Mrs. Lowndes had always believed her neighbor to be a rather peculiar person. He was very strange. Scientists always are. And she believed her neighbor to be a quite peculiar person. Now it seemed that he had gone completely crazy. And now the lady feels that the man has turned to be completely crazy and mad now. She was a bit scared even. She wondered whether she could run into the house and fetch her husband. As I told you, she was highly frightened. She was scared. So therefore, the first thought that came to her mind, she wondered whether she should run into the house and fetch her husband. Should I go to my house in order to get my husband and come back once again to the garden with my husband? That is what the lady felt first. No, she thought. But a second thought came to her. But no, she thought, no, he is harmless, though he is peculiar in nature. At the same time, the lady knows that he is not a harmful person at all. He is totally harmless. So therefore, there is no need for me to get inside the house to come back with my husband. That is what the second thought comes to the mind of the lady. Once again, let's see. No, she thought, no, he is harmless. The man is totally harmless. Absolutely harmless the man is. I will just humor him. And she felt that I will make fun of him. That is what the lady feels now. Certainly, Mr. Counselor, if you like, I'll cut another flower for you, Mr. Counselor, if you wish to. If you want me to cut another flower, the lady says, certainly I'll be cutting one more. Certainly, Mr. Counselor, if you like, she said. And she took her scissors from the basket, bent down and snipped another rose. So once again, she took back the scissors which was already placed in her basket together with the flowers. She took the scissors once again from the basket, bent it down and snipped another rose. Snip over here means to cut. Snipped, she cut another rose flower. As Counselor asked Mrs. Lowndes to cut another flower, she did the same. Again, Counselor heard that frightful, throatless shriek in the earphone. Again, it came at the exact moment the rose stem was cut. He took off the earphones and ran to the fence that separated the two gardens. All right, he said, that's enough. No more, please, no more. Again, Counselor heard the frightful, throatless shriek in the earphone. Again, it came at the exact moment the rose stem was cut. The moment the lady cut the flower for him. It was exactly at that moment, the same sound, that is what the writer uses here, the frightful, throatless shriek in the earphone he was able to hear. Again, it came at the exact moment the rose stem was cut, and the sound he was able to hear with the help of his earphone. At the exact moment when the lady cut the flower with her scissors, he took off the earphones and ran to the fence that separated the two gardens. He removed his earphone and ran towards the lady, towards the fence which separated her garden from that of her garden. He ran towards there. He took off the earphones and ran to the fence that separated the two gardens. All right, he said. That's enough. No more. Please, no more. He says that it's enough. Please don't cut any more flowers. Please don't cut any more. The woman stood there, a yellow rose in one hand, clippers in the another, looking at him. The lady did not understand at all. The man requested her to cut a flower. She did the same, and the moment she cut the flowers, instantly the man ran towards the fence that separated the two gardens, throwing out the earphone, and he says, enough, please don't cut any more. That is what the man told to the lady. The woman stood there, a yellow rose in one hand, holding yellow rose in one of her hands, clippers in the other, holding scissors in the another hand, looking at him. She stared at the man. She was totally bewildered. She did not understand what is taking place over there. I am going to tell you something. Mrs. Launders, he said, something that you won't believe. He put his hands on top of the fence and peered at her intently through his thick spectacles. You have this evening cut a basket full of roses. You have, with a sharp pair of scissors, cut through the stems of living things, and each rose that you cut screamed in the most terrible way. Did you know that, Mrs. Launders? No, she said, I certainly don't know that. Okay, let's see. I am going to tell you something, Mrs. Launders, he said. Now he narrates something to her. He says, I am going to tell you something very seriously, Mrs. Launders, something that you won't believe. And I am certain, what am I going to tell? You will not believe it at all. You will not believe what I am going to tell you. He put his hands on top of the fence and peered at her intently. Intently means very closely. He placed one of his hands on the fencing, and through his spectacle, he started looking at her very keenly, very intently. He put his hands on the top of the fence. Both the hands he placed on the top of the low fence that separated both the gardens, and peered at her intently, and peered at her very keenly, very intently, very closely through his thick spectacles. You have this evening cut a basket full of roses. He continues the narration. He says, you have this evening cut a basket full of roses. You have, with a sharp pair of scissors, cut through the stems of living things, and each rose that you have cut screamed in the most terrible way. Did you know that, Mrs. Launders? This evening you have cut so many flowers. You have placed those flowers in your basket. Do you know at the same time when you cut the rose flowers, it started screaming loudly? Are you aware of it? That is what Mr. Counselor asked to Mrs. Launders. Once again, let's go through the original words. You have this evening cut a basket full of roses. You have, with a sharp pair of scissors, cut through the stems of the living things. With your sharp scissors, you have cut the stems of the flowers, stems of a living thing, the stems of the living things, and each rose that you cut screamed in a most terrifying way. When you cut the stems of these living stems, they started screaming in the top of their voice. That is what he says. And each rose that you cut screamed in the most terrible way. Did you know that, Mrs. Launders? Are you aware of it, Mrs. Launders? No, she said, I certainly don't know that. The lady said, no, I don't know whether these living things, that is the branch of the flower, the stem of the flowers, whether they scream. It's beyond my knowledge. That is what the lady said. I certainly don't know that. It happens to be true, he said. He was breathing rather rapidly, but he was trying to control his excitement. I heard them shrieking. Each time you cut one, I heard the cry of pain. A very high-pitched sound, approximately 1032,000 vibrations a second. You could not possibly have heard it yourself, but I heard it. The lady told that, certainly I don't know that they have started producing, they started crying. Certainly I am unaware of it. In response to that, let's see what counselor says. It happens to be true, he said. It really happened, he says. He was breathing rather rapidly, but he was trying to control his excitement. He was highly excited, so therefore he started breathing very rapidly, but he was trying to control his excitement. At the same time, he tried to control the excitement. I heard them shrieking. He continues his narration. I heard them shrieking. Each time you cut one, I heard the cry of pain. Each time you cut the branch, it cried out of pain. A very high-pitched sound, and he says what kind of sound he was able to hear. He says a very high-pitched sound, approximately 132,000 vibration a second, which produced approximately 1,032,000 vibration a second. You couldn't possibly have heard it yourself, but I heard it. Certainly you must not have heard it. But with the help of this machine, he says, I was able to hear this shrieking sound. Did you really, Mr. Counselor? She decided she would make a dash for the house in about 5 seconds. So she responds to him by saying, did you really, Mr. Counselor? Did you really hear the sound, the shrieking sound, Mr. Counselor? She decided she would make a dash. Make a dash over here means run quickly. She felt that now she has to run quickly because the man is very close to. We saw that once he heard the sound, he threw his earphone, ran towards the fence which separated both the garden. And now he stands closer to the garden of the lady, and therefore she feels that she decided she would make a dash. I must run very, very quickly for the house in about 5 seconds. 5 seconds over here means hurriedly. I may have to run away from here. It is not safe for me to stand in front of such a kind of man. That is what the lady decided, or lady feels at the moment. You might say, he went on, that a rose bush has no nervous system to feel with, no throat to cry with. You could be right. It hasn't. Not like ours anyway. But how do you know, Mrs. Launders? And here he leaned far over the fence and spoke in a fierce whisper. How do you know that a rose bush does not feel as much pain when someone cuts its stem in two as you would feel if someone cut your wrist off with a garden shears? How do you know that? It's alive, isn't it? You might say, he went on, that a rose bush has no nervous system to feel with, no throat to cry with. So as she asked counselor, did you really, Mr. Counselor, did you really hear the shrieking sound? That is what the lady asked. In response to that, now counselor says, you might say, he went on, that a rose bush has no nervous system to feel with, no throat to cry with. Yes, you may feel. How can they cry? Because they don't have a throat at all. And how can they feel the pain? That is what you must say. You could be right. And in that regard, you must be right sometimes, because they have no nervous system to feel with and they do not have the throat to cry with. You may be right in your way of thinking. It hasn't. It doesn't have the throat as well as it doesn't have the nervous system. It hasn't. Not like ours anyway. And he further says, not like ours anyway. Anyway, they do not have the same nervous system, same throat like that of ours. But how do you know, Mrs. Launders, how do you know that a rose bush does not feel as much pain when someone cuts its stem in two as you would feel if someone cut your wrist off with a garden shears? Garden shears over here means garden scissors. When someone cuts your body, your wrist with the help of a scissors, will you not be experiencing the pain? How can you say that such kind of pain is not experienced by a rose flower? That is what he asks here. Once again, let's continue with that. But how do you know, Mrs. Launders? And here he leaned far over the fence. He leaned himself over the fence and spoke in a fierce whisper. He started speaking so softly, as like a whisper he started to speak. How do you know that a rose bush does not feel as much pain? How can you say they do not feel the pain when someone cuts it with the help its stem with the help of a scissors. How can you say that they do not experience the pain at all when they are cut with the help of scissors? As you would feel if someone cut your wrist off. Suppose someone cuts your wrist, certainly you will be you will be experiencing the pain. So the same kind of pain, he says that sometimes the rostrum also must be undergoing. How do you know that? It's alive, isn't it? How do you know that they will not experience the pain at all? And the next thing he says, it's alive. It's a living thing, isn't it? Yes, Mr. Counselor. Oh yes, and good night. Quickly, she turned and ran up to the garden to her house. Counselor went back to the table. He put on the earphones and stood for a while listening. He could still hear the faint crackling sound and the humming noise of the machine, but nothing more. He bent down and took hold of a small white daisy growing on the lawn. He took it between the thumb and forefinger and slowly pulled it upward and sideways until the stem broke. So, how do you know that? It is alive, isn't it? That is what the question he asked to Mrs. Launders. Let's see what Mrs. Launders' reaction here is. Yes, Mr. Counselor. Oh, yes, and good night. The lady said, yes, yes. It is alive, it's alive. That's the only thing the lady gave the answer to the man. And she said good night. Quickly she turned and ran up to the garden to her house. She ran towards her house because she was highly frightened as she saw the reaction in Mr. Counselor. So she ran towards her house and the counselor went back to the table. So as the lady moved from there, once again the man moved towards the sound machine which was kept on the table, and he put on the earphones and stood for a while listening. Once again he placed the earphone. The moment he heard the sound, he removed the earphone and ran towards the lady, towards the fence which separated both the garden. So now as the lady moved back to her own house, the man once again came back to the machine. He placed the earphone once again and stood for a while listening. And he wanted to listen to. Let's see what happened. He could still hear the faint crackling sound and the humming noise of the machine, but nothing more. The only sound that is audible to him at the present moment is the humming sound which was produced from the machine. From the beginning, before the flower was being cut by the lady, the same humming sound he was able to hear with the help of the earphone. And that was the only sound at the present moment he is able to listen to. He bent down and took hold of a small white daisy growing on the lawn. Daisy is a flower. So he bent himself down and took hold of a small white daisy growing on the lawn. He took it between the thumb and the forefinger. He placed the daisy flower between his thumb as well as his forefinger and slowly pulled it upward. He slowly started pulling the daisy flower upwards and sideways until the stem broke. Very slowly he did it. Suddenly he did not do it at all. He started pulling it very slowly upwards and towards the side until the stem broke, till the stem of the daisy was broken. From the moment that he started pulling to the moment when the stem broke, he distinctly heard in the earphones a faint high-pitched cry, curiously inanimate. He took another daisy and did it again. Once more he heard the cry, but he wasn't sure now that it expressed pain. No, it was not pain. It was surprise. Or was it? It did not really express any of the feelings or emotions known to the human being. It was just a cry, a neutral, stony cry, a single emotionless note expressing nothing. It had been the same with the roses. He had been wrong in calling it a cry of pain. A flower probably don't feel pain. It felt something else which we don't know about. Something called the toin or spur or plummet or anything you like. From the moment that he started pulling to the moment when the stem broke, he distinctly heard in the earphones a faint, high-pitched cry, curiously inanimate. From the moment he started placing the flower in between his thumb and the forefinger, from the moment he started pulling it upwards and sideways, till the time it was separated from the plant, he was able to hear something. And the writer very clearly uses here, he distinctly heard, very clearly he heard through his earphones, a faint, high-pitched cry, curiously inanimate. At the same time, he knew that it is an inanimate sound. He took another daisy and did it again. He wanted to make it sure that he was not wrong. So therefore, what he did was, he took another daisy and did it again. Same thing he has done. He placed the daisy flower in between his thumb and the forefinger, and he started pulling it towards, upwards as well as the sideways, and did it again. Once more he heard the cry, but he wasn't sure now that it expressed pain. He heard the sound once again, but now he is not very sure whether it was the cry of pain. Earlier he told that the rose flower produced the cry out of pain. Now he is not very clear whether it was a painful cry. No, it wasn't pain. It was surprise. Now he feels that it was not pain at all, but it was surprise. That is what he feels. And immediately after that, he asks the question to himself, or was it? Or was it a surprise? He is uncertain about that too. It did not really express any of the feeling or emotions known to the human being. It expressed something, but the expression is beyond the level of human beings to understand. It was just a cry. A neutral, stony cry. A single, emotionless note expressing nothing. It was an emotionless note. It did not express anything at all, expressing nothing. It had been the same with the roses. Now he feels that it had been the same with the roses as well. He had been wrong in calling it a cry of pain. Now he realizes that earlier I told it was a cry of pain, and that is wrong, he says. A flower probably don't feel pain. Now he comes to the conclusion, a flower may not experience pain at all. It felt something else, which we do not know about. It expressed something, but we do not know exactly what it is. Something called toin or spurl or plinicumend. All these words are used to express something which are unknown to the people. So toin or